I woke before the sun had even begun to rise, the hush of the early morning wrapping around me like a secret. I stood in front of the mirror, carefully curling my hair and smoothing out the pale pink dress I had chosen for today. It was soft and elegant, the kind of dress you wore when you wanted to look like you belonged. I pinned my hair back with my grandmother's clip, a small piece of family history that always made me feel strong. I told myself that today was a celebration. I told myself that today would be different. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that I was only fooling myself. When I arrived at the venue, the marble floors were polished to a gleam, the scent of fresh roses filling the air. Guests were already gathering, their voices bright with laughter, their footsteps quick and sure. I smiled and nodded, moving through the crowd with practiced ease. My heart was steady, my hands calm. I had learned long ago how to make myself small, how to fit into the spaces people left for me. But today there were no spaces left. I saw Marissa as soon as I entered. She was radiant in her white dress, the kind of beauty that demanded attention. She saw me too, her eyes flicking over me, with a cool, practiced smile. "Oh, you're here," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We've had to make some changes to the seating. I hope you don't mind." She gestured behind me, to a small table tucked against the wall, half hidden by a column. My name card was there, perched on the edge, like an afterthought. "You'll be sitting there," she said sweetly, "near the kitchen. It's more convenient that way." I felt the words land like a slap. Near the kitchen, like I was an afterthought, like I was nothing. I looked at her, searching for some hint of apology in her eyes. But there was none. Only that cool, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," I said softly. "Whatever you think is best." I walked to the little table, my heels clicking softly on the marble. It was a table for two, small and cramped, the kind of table you might reserve for a late guest who didn't matter. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap, my face calm, even as my heart pounded in my chest. Around me, the room sparkled with light and laughter. But I felt like I was sitting on the outside of a glass wall, watching a world I wasn't welcome in. I could see the main table from where I sat, the place of honor, where family and close friends laughed and toasted. I saw my son Michael, his smile tight and forced as he moved through the crowd. He didn't look at me. He didn't even glance my way. My chest ached, but I kept my back straight and my chin high. I would not let them see me break. The ceremony began soon after the music, soft and sweet, as Marissa walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Everyone stood, a sea of bright eyes and warm smiles. I rose too, even though from where I sat I could barely see. I craned my neck, trying to catch a glimpse of Michael's face, but all I saw was the back of Marissa's dress, the shimmer of her veil in the golden light. I blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall. Not here, not now. After the ceremony, as the guests made their way to the reception, I lingered for a moment, letting the crowd pass me by. I needed that moment to breathe, to find my center again. When I finally stepped into the reception hall, I saw that nothing had changed. My little table was still there, tucked in the shadows, the only table not touched by the warm glow of the chandeliers. Marissa caught my eye as she moved through the room, her laughter bright and musical. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The message was clear: this was my place. In the shadows, on the edges, where no one would notice if I disappeared. I took my seat again, my hands trembling just slightly. I watched the dancers spin across the polished floor, the music swelling around them like a wave. I watched the toasts and the laughter, the clink of glasses, and the quiet murmur of voices. And I sat in the corner, invisible. For years I had believed that, if I was quiet enough, if I made myself small enough, they would make room for me. That if I gave enough, cared enough, stayed silent enough, they would see me. But today, as I sat there in the shadows, I realized that some people would never see me, no matter how hard I tried. And maybe that was their blindness, not my worth. I sipped at the glass of champagne someone had left behind, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. I watched Marissa laugh with her friends, her smile bright and easy. I watched Michael raise his glass in a toast, his eyes fixed on the future he thought he had secured. I watched it all, and I felt something inside me settle. I wouldn't make a scene. I wouldn't raise my voice or demand my place at their table. But I would remember. I would remember every look, every quiet dismissal, every time they had made me feel small, and I would use that memory. As the music swelled and the night wore on, I sat in the corner, my back straight, and my hands calm in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't let them see the hurt that sat like a stone in my chest. But in the quiet of my mind, I made a promise to myself. This would be the last time they treated me like this. I wouldn't fight them with anger. I wouldn't beg them to see me. I had something better than anger. I had a plan. And when the time came, they would understand just how wrong they had been to push me aside. Because I wasn't nobody, not anymore. The morning after the wedding felt different, though nothing had really changed. The sun rose the same way it always did, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. But as I lay in bed staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I could feel something inside me had shifted. A quiet resolve had taken root, small but unshakable. I would not forget what they had done to me. I got up slowly, moving through the house with a practiced calm. My movements were deliberate, my mind clear and focused. I made a pot of coffee, the rich, dark aroma filling the kitchen. I took my cup to the table and sat down, the warmth of the mug in my hands, grounding me. I thought about the night before, about the way Marissa's laughter had filled the room while I sat alone at that small table, pushed aside and ignored. I thought about Michael, my son, and the way he hadn't met my eyes even once. It wasn't just Marissa who had decided I didn't belong there. It was all of them. They had chosen to look past me, to pretend that I didn't matter. But I did. I knew it in my bones. When the phone rang later that morning, I saw Marissa's name flashing on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But I didn't. I answered, my voice calm. Hello? Her tone was as sweet as ever, that syrupy softness that I'd learned to recognize for what it really was, control. Hi, she said brightly. I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're not upset about yesterday. She paused, the silence stretching between us. It was a big day, and sometimes things get a little overwhelming. I let her words hang there, not rushing to fill the quiet. Finally, I said, no, I'm not upset. It was the truth. I wasn't upset, I was focused. She laughed, a soft, practiced sound. Good. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so accommodating. Her voice trailed off, and I could almost see the small, satisfied smile on her lips. I hope the rest of the evening went the way you wanted, I said. My voice was even polite, controlled. It was beautiful. And it had been in its own cold, perfect way. Oh, it was wonderful, she said, her tone brightening. Everything was just as I imagined. She paused again, and I could hear the faint sound of dishes clinking in the background. Anyway, I won't keep you. Just wanted to clear the air. She didn't wait for me to answer before she hung up, the click of the phone line, as abrupt as her dismissal. I set the phone down and sat there for a long moment, the silence of the house settling around me. I thought about her words, the careful way she had said them. She didn't care if I was hurt. She only wanted to make sure I stayed quiet. But I wouldn't be quiet. Not anymore. I spent the rest of the day moving through my routine like a dance I knew by heart. I cleaned the kitchen, folded the laundry, watered the small potted plants that lined the windowsill. Each small task was an act of calm control, a way to steady myself for what I knew was coming. In the afternoon, I sat down at my desk with a stack of papers and an old file folder I hadn't opened in years. It was the lease for the wedding venue, signed and notarized. My name was there in careful script, right alongside the owner's. A quiet secret I had carried with me all these years. I ran my fingers over the ink, the weight of it grounding me. They thought they could push me aside, that they could take everything from me and leave me in the shadows. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know that this venue wasn't just theirs, it was mine too. I smiled to myself, a small secret smile that tasted like victory. I knew what I had to do. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The air was cool and smelled of fresh grass and distant wood smoke. I let the quiet of the evening settle around me, the steady rhythm of my footsteps matching the steady beat of my heart. I passed houses lit from within warm pools of light that spoke of laughter and family. I thought about how easily those images could slip away, how quickly the world could turn cold when people chose to look the other way. I wouldn't let them do that to me anymore. When I returned home, I felt a calm certainty settle into my bones. I made myself a simple dinner roast chicken and a handful of greens from the garden, and ate in silence, savoring the small act of caring for myself. It felt like an act of defiance, a reminder that I was still here, still standing. After dinner, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the stars blink to life in the dark sky. I thought about the wedding, the way Marissa had looked at me like I was nothing. I thought about Michael, the way he had turned away from me. And I thought about the lease, that small but powerful document that said I was more than they had ever believed. I whispered to myself, "You're not invisible." And in that moment, I believed it. I knew the days ahead would not be easy. There would be anger, there would be accusations, there would be moments when I would doubt myself. But I also knew that I was done being the quiet one in the corner. I was done letting them write the story of who I was. As I turned off the lights and made my way to bed, I felt a calm, steady fire burning in my chest. They had pushed me aside at the wedding, made me feel small and unwanted. But I wasn't small, I wasn't invisible, and soon they would understand that. This was just the beginning. The next morning dawned cold and clear. The sky was a sharp, perfect blue, but I didn't notice it at first. My mind was already moving carefully through the pieces of the plan I had begun to shape in the quiet hours of the night. I moved through my morning routine with calm deliberation, each small task another reminder of the control I still held. I brewed a pot of coffee, the scent warm and comforting, and sat at the kitchen table with the lease for the venue laid out in front of me. My name stared back at me from the page, a quiet proof that I had been there all along, even if they had refused to see me. I read through the clauses, every line and every signature, letting the words sink into my bones like armor. This was mine. They had treated me like I was an inconvenience, but they didn't know that I had a hand in the very place they thought they owned, a place they had used to make me feel small. But that was about to change. I spent the rest of the morning making phone calls, my voice calm and clear as I spoke to the people who managed the venue day to day. They knew me, respected me in the quiet professional way of people who understand that money and history matter more than social games. They didn't ask questions when I asked for copies of the latest maintenance reports, the invoices for the wedding, the names of the suppliers who had worked behind the scenes. They simply said, "Of course, ma'am," and sent the documents over without hesitation. I felt the weight of each email, each file, as I opened them and filed them away. These were the threads of the web I was weaving, each one a quiet testament to the power I had always held but had never dared to use. By the afternoon, I had everything I needed. I sat at my desk, the soft light of the winter sun slanting through the window, and let myself breathe for a moment. I thought about Marissa, about the way her smile had turned sharp and cold when she told me where to sit. I thought about Michael, the way he had looked past me, like I was nothing more than a piece of furniture in a room he barely noticed. And I let the anger come, just for a moment. It was a quiet, steady burn, no longer the hot, lashing fury that left me breathless. It was something deeper now, something that felt like it had always been a part of me. I closed my eyes and let it settle into my bones, a quiet promise that I would no longer let their smallness define my worth. That evening, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. The air was crisp and cold, the trees bare and skeletal against the darkening sky. I let the steady rhythm of my footsteps ground me, each step a reminder that I was still here. Still standing. I passed houses glowing warm with light laughter drifting through open windows, and I felt no envy. My own home might be quiet, but it was mine. And soon they would know just how much I could shape the spaces they thought they controlled. When I got home, I sat down at the kitchen table again, the lease still open in front of me. I traced my name with the tip of my finger, letting the familiar loops of the letters remind me of who I was, not just the mother who had been pushed aside, Not just the quiet woman in the corner, but someone with a voice, with a place in the world that no one could take from her. I made myself a cup of tea, the steam curling around my face like a soft promise. As I sipped it, I thought about the wedding again, about the music and the laughter, and the way they had all looked past me. I thought about how small they had tried to make me feel, how easy it had been for them to pretend I didn't matter. And I let that memory settle into the center of me, like a stone. Heavy, unshakable. Because they were wrong. I was done waiting for them to see me. I would show them instead. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a simple, elegant outfit that made me feel strong. I pinned my hair back, the small silver clip, a quiet talisman against the doubts that still tried to whisper in the back of my mind. I looked at myself in the mirror and said softly, "You're not nobody." And I believed it. I left the house early, the cold morning air waking me up as I walked to the venue's office. The woman at the front desk greeted me with a warm smile, her eyes kind. "Good morning, ma'am," she said. "How can I help you today?" I smiled back, calm and sure. "I need to speak to the manager," I said. "It's about the lease." She nodded without question, picking up the phone to call him down. I stood there, my hands folded neatly in front of me, and waited. When he came down, his expression was polite but cautious. "Of course," he said. "Come to my office." I followed him down the hall, each step sure and steady. In his office, I sat across from him and laid the lease on the table. "I want to discuss my rights as co-owner," I said quietly. "There are decisions I'd like to make about how this venue is used." His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't argue. "Of course," he said again. "We'll review everything together." And just like that, the first real step was taken. As I walked home later, I felt a quiet triumph settle in my chest. They had tried to make me feel small, but I had found my voice. They thought I was nothing, but I had the power to change everything. And this was only the beginning. By the next morning, the world outside seemed to hum with the promise of change. The air was cold and sharp, but I felt warm beneath my coat, my resolve like a second skin. I walked to the venue's office again, the quiet hush of the morning, a calm backdrop to the thoughts that raced through my mind. I knew what I was going to do, and I knew there was no turning back. When I stepped into the office, the woman at the front desk greeted me with that same warm smile, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Good morning, ma'am," she said. "Back again so soon?" I smiled, calm and sure. "Yes," I said. "There are a few things I'd like to clarify." She nodded and picked up the phone to call the manager. I stood there, my breath slow and steady, feeling the weight of what I was about to do settle into my bones. The manager came down moments later, his expression polite but guarded. "Of course," he said. "Please come in." I followed him down the hallway, the sound of my heels on the polished floor, a quiet, steady beat. In his office, I sat down across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I took a breath, letting the calm settle over me. "I've been reviewing the lease," I said softly, "and I'd like to discuss my rights as co-owner." He blinked, surprised but not dismissive. "Of course," he said. "What questions do you have?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm. "I understand that as a co-owner, I have the authority to make decisions about how this venue is used," I said. "I also understand that I have the right to close the venue for any event I feel does not align with my standards." He nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "That's correct," he said, "though it's rare for someone to exercise that right." I smiled, a small secret smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Well," I said softly, "I think it's time someone did." He sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "May I ask why?" he said carefully. I held his gaze, my voice quiet but firm. "Because I will not let them treat me like I don't matter," I said. "Because I will not let them use this place, my place, to make me feel small." He was silent for a moment, his eyes searching mine. Then he nodded. "I understand," he said, "and I'll support whatever decision you make." I left his office with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in days. Outside, the air was cold and bright, the sun just beginning to break through the clouds. I walked slowly each step, a quiet act of defiance. They thought they could push me aside, but they didn't know that I was woven into the very walls of the place they thought they owned, and they were about to learn just how much power I truly held. When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, the steam curling around my face like a quiet promise. I thought about the wedding, the way they had laughed and danced while I sat in the shadows. I thought about the way Marissa had smiled at me, so sure of her place in the world. And I let those memories settle into my chest like stones, heavy grounding, unyielding. That afternoon, I called the catering company. The woman who answered was polite and professional, her voice brisk. "How can I help you?" she asked. "I'd like to discuss the upcoming event," I said calmly. "The wedding that was held here last weekend." There was a pause, a flicker of confusion. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you calling on behalf of the bride or the groom?" I smiled, my voice calm. "I'm calling on behalf of the venue," I said. "And as co-owner, I have the authority to approve or cancel any future events." Another pause, this one longer. "Of course," she said finally. "How can I assist you? I'd like to place a hold on any future bookings for the time being," I said. "Until further notice." She didn't argue. She didn't question. She just said, understood, and hung up. I sat there for a moment, the quiet of the house settling around me like a cloak. I felt the power in my hands, the quiet, steady control I had never dared to claim before. And it felt good. It felt right. That evening, I walked through the venue itself, the soft light of the chandeliers casting warm pools of gold across the polished floors. I ran my fingers over the tables, the soft linen, the flicker of candlelight reflected in the glasses. This was my place, my history written into every corner. And they had tried to pretend I didn't exist here, but they couldn't erase me. I wouldn't let them. I stood in the middle of the empty dance floor and closed my eyes, letting the silence wash over me. I thought about all the times I had been quiet, all the times I had let their voices drown out my own. But not anymore. I had the leverage now, the quiet power they had never seen coming. When I got home, I wrote out a simple statement of intent, outlining my decision to place the venue on temporary hold. My handwriting was careful and steady, each word a quiet declaration of the future I was choosing for myself. I signed my name at the bottom, the ink still wet and shining in the soft light. I read it over one last time and smiled. This was my first real step, the first quiet act of power in a world that had always tried to keep me silent. And I knew as I set the paper aside and turned off the light that this was only the beginning, because they had tried to push me aside, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. And soon they would see. The day I decided to confront them dawned bright and cold, the sky a clear blue that felt like a challenge. I woke early, the weight of what I was about to do pressing into my chest, but I didn't let it shake me. I dressed in simple, elegant clothes, nothing flashy, nothing loud, just enough to make me feel like I belonged exactly where I was going. I arrived at the venue before they did the familiar marble floors, cool beneath my careful steps. I walked through the empty hall, the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood surrounding me like a quiet promise. This place had always been mine, even when they had tried to pretend it wasn't. When Marissa and Michael finally arrived, they looked surprised to see me standing there. Marissa's smile was tight and brittle, her eyes flicking over me with something like annoyance. Michael looked away, his jaw tight. "What are you doing here?" Marissa asked, her voice soft but sharp. "This isn't your place anymore." I lifted my chin, my voice calm. "Actually," I said quietly, "it is." I reached into my bag and pulled out the lease, the pages carefully folded and worn from years of quiet ownership. I laid it on the table between us, my hand steady. "I'm a co-owner of this venue," I said, "and I'm here to make a decision." For a moment, there was silence. Then Marissa laughed, a soft, dismissive sound that grated against my skin. "Oh, please," she said. "You're nothing but a silent partner. You don't actually have any say in how things run here?" I met her gaze evenly. "I have every right," I said, "and I'm exercising it now. Michael shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking between us. Mom, he said, his voice low. This isn't necessary. Let's just talk about this later. No, I said, my voice firm. We'll talk about it now. I turned back to Marissa, my expression calm. I'm placing the venue on temporary hold, I said. Effective immediately. No future bookings. No events. Until I decide otherwise. Her smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. You can't do that, she said, her voice sharp. We have events booked for months. You'll ruin everything. I know, I said softly. But this is my decision to make. And I won't let you use this place to treat me like I don't exist. Michael took a step closer, his brow furrowed. Mom, please, he said. You're overreacting. Let's just sit down and talk this through. I looked at him, my heart aching with the weight of everything he didn't understand. I tried to talk, I said. For years I tried, and all you did was look past me. I took a breath, steady and sure. I'm done being invisible. Marissa's eyes narrowed, her smile gone. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. You're going to regret pushing me. I didn't flinch, maybe I said. But I'd rather regret standing up for myself than regret staying silent. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, my voice calm. This isn't about anger, I said. This is about respect. And you will not use this place to belittle me again. There was another long silence, the air between us thick with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Marissa turned to Michael, her voice low. Do something, she said. But he just shook his head, his shoulders slumping. She's within her rights, he said softly. It's her decision. For a moment, Marissa looked like she might argue again, her mouth opening in protest. But then she snapped it shut, her eyes cold and bright. Fine, she said, her voice icy. Do whatever you want. But don't expect me to just sit here and take it. I met her gaze, my own steady. I'm not expecting anything from you, I said. I'm done expecting you to treat me like family. I gathered the lease and tucked it back into my bag, the weight of it reassuring against my side. I turned to leave, my steps slow and deliberate. As I walked past them, I paused for a moment, my hand resting lightly on the doorframe. This is my place, I said softly, and I'm taking it back. Outside, the air felt crisp and clean, the sky still bright and blue. I drew in a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs and steady my heart. I had done what I needed to do, and I felt free. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing in the center of my own life, no longer on the edges. Back at home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a promise. I thought about the look on Marissa's face, the way her smile had finally cracked. I thought about Michael, the way he had finally seen me, not as an inconvenience, but as someone with power. And I thought about the venue, the place that had always been mine, even when I'd let them convince me it wasn't. I sipped my tea slowly, the warmth of it steady in my hands. I knew this wasn't the end. I knew there would be more battles ahead, more moments when doubt would try to creep back in. But I also knew that I was done being quiet, done being small. I had made my stand, and I wasn't going to back down now. I whispered to myself, "You're not nobody." And in that quiet, I felt the truth of it settle deep in my bones. I was somebody. I was the woman who had been pushed aside and who had found the strength to push back. And this was only the beginning. The days after I closed the venue felt heavy and quiet, like the world was holding its breath. The phone calls started almost immediately, first polite, then insistent. Vendors wanted answers. Clients wanted reassurances. But I was calm, my voice steady, as I explained to each of them that there would be no events until further notice. I didn't owe them anything more than that. At home, the silence of my small kitchen became my refuge. I would sit with a cup of tea and watch the steam curl in the light, letting each quiet moment settle into my bones. I knew what I had done. I knew it was right. But that didn't make it any easier to face the anger I knew was coming. It didn't take long for Marissa to come knocking on my door. It was early in the evening, the sun just beginning to sink behind the trees. I opened the door and found her standing there, her arms crossed and her jaw tight. "You're making a mistake," she said without preamble, her voice low and sharp. "You're ruining everything." I leaned against the doorframe, my face calm. "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm taking back what's mine." Her eyes flashed the mask of polite sweetness gone. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" she said, her voice rising. "We have contracts. People are counting on us. You're making us look like fools." I met her gaze evenly. "I'm not the one who made me look like a fool," I said quietly. "That was you, and Michael, and everyone else who thought I would just sit there and take it." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "I'm not interested in fighting with you," I said. "I've made my decision. It's done." For a moment, she looked like she might scream. But then she took a breath, her shoulders lifting and falling as she tried to steady herself. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice soft but cold. "You'll see that you're only hurting yourself." I shook my head, my voice calm. "I'm done hurting myself to keep other people comfortable," I said. "If this is the price of respect, I'll pay it." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine for something weakness maybe. Doubt, but I had none left to give her. Finally, she turned on her heel and walked away, her steps quick and angry. I watched her go, the quiet of the evening settling around me like a promise. The next day, Michael called. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers wrapped around the warm mug in front of me. "We can talk," I said, "but I'm not changing my mind." He was silent for a moment. "I know," he said finally. I don't understand why you're doing this." I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "Because you made me feel like I didn't matter," I said. "Because you let her treat me like I was invisible. And because I've spent too long letting you decide who I am in this family." There was another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. "I didn't mean for it to be like that," he said. I didn't see it." I closed my eyes for a moment, my chest aching with the weight of everything we had never said to each other. "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't see it. You didn't see me." He let out a shaky breath. "So what now?" he asked. "What happens next?" I opened my eyes and looked out the window, the winter light soft and blue. "Now," I said quietly, "you figure out how to see me, and I figure out how to stand in my own power." There was no anger in my voice, no bitterness, just a quiet certainty that felt like a promise to myself. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, the house quiet around me. I thought about everything I had lost, and everything I had found in these last few days. I thought about the venue, the place that had always been mine, in ways no one else had understood. And I thought about the woman I had become, the woman who could stand in the face of anger and not flinch. The phone rang again that afternoon. This time it was the venue manager, his voice calm but serious. "I've had several calls from clients," he said. "They're upset." "I know," I said quietly. "But this is the right decision, and it's final." There was a pause, and then he spoke again. "I just wanted you to know," he said. "I support you. Whatever you need, I'll back you up." I let out a slow breath, my chest easing a little at his quiet strength. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." That night, I sat by the window again, the city lights flickering in the distance. I thought about the way Marissa's face had tightened with anger, the way Michael's voice had faltered with uncertainty. I thought about all the years I had spent being careful, being quiet, making myself small to fit into the spaces they allowed me. And I realized I was done with all of that. I was done apologizing for taking up space in a world that had tried to push me aside. As I turned off the lights and made my way to bed, I felt a quiet power settle into my bones. They could be angry, they could be hurt, but they couldn't make me small again. They couldn't take away what I had claimed for myself. I whispered to the darkness, "You're not nobody." And in that quiet, I knew it was true. I was somebody, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were quiet but tense, like the world was holding its breath. I went about my routine, calmly cooking meals, tidying up the house, reading the same lease over and over, until I could recite every clause by heart. But underneath that calm was something else, a quiet certainty that I had made the right choice, no matter how much they wanted me to doubt it. I didn't hear from Marissa for days after she'd stormed away from my front porch. Part of me wondered if she was too proud to come back, if she decided to cut me out completely, now that she knew she couldn't control me anymore. But I knew her well enough to be sure that silence wasn't her final word. She would come back, she always did, when she felt her grip slipping. And she did. It was a Thursday afternoon when she showed up again, standing in the doorway of the venue manager's office, with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was dressed in soft colors. Her hair perfectly styled her tone, sweet and measured. But I could see the edge in her eyes, the quiet fury she was trying to hide. "I thought we could talk," she said softly, her hands folded neatly in front of her, like adults. I looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "Of course," I said, my voice calm. "Let's talk." We sat across from each other at the manager's desk, the room quiet around us. She began carefully, her words smooth and deliberate. "I understand you're upset," she said, her tone sympathetic. "I know that things got tense at the wedding. But don't you think this has gone far enough?" I watched her, my face composed, my hands still. "You're right," I said softly. "It has gone far enough. That's why I'm not backing down." She blinked clearly, not expecting that. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice slipping just a little. "You're making this into something bigger than it needs to be." I shook my head, my voice quiet but firm. "No," I said. "I'm making it exactly as big as it needs to be. Because I'm done letting you decide how much I matter." For a moment, there was silence. Then she leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Do you know what you're doing?" she said. "You're making yourself an enemy of this family. You're embarrassing Michael. You're embarrassing all of us." I held her gaze steadily. "No," I said calmly. "I'm making a stand. And if that embarrasses you, that's your shame to carry, not mine." She sat back in her chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice low. "You think you have power here, but you're just playing at something you don't understand." I felt a small smile tug at the corners of my mouth, quiet and sure. "I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand that I have every right to take back what you tried to take from me. And I'm not going to let you stop me." There was another pause, longer this time. Then she spoke again, her voice softer, more coaxing. "I'm willing to compromise," she said. "If you take back the hold on the venue, I'll make sure you're included in future events. We can put this behind us." Her words were smooth, tempting, but I heard the emptiness in them, the promise of inclusion that had never meant anything before and would never mean anything now. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I don't need to be included on your terms. I don't need your approval or your permission." My voice didn't rise, didn't break. It was calm and sure. "I'm not asking you to see me anymore. I'm telling you to." For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just looked at me, her eyes bright with anger she was too proud to show. And I realized in that quiet that this was the moment she understood she had lost. Because I wasn't backing down. Because for the first time, she couldn't find a way to twist my words or make me feel small. Finally, she stood, her movements careful and controlled. "You'll regret this," she said softly, her voice shaking just a little. "You're making enemies you can't afford." I looked up at her, my voice calm. "I'd rather have enemies than spend one more day pretending I don't exist," I said. "You're not the only one who knows how to stand her ground." She didn't answer. She just turned and walked out, her shoulders stiff, her head high. I watched her go, the quiet of the room settling around me like a promise. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth. And nothing she could say or do would change that. After she left, the manager looked at me, his expression quiet and thoughtful. "That was impressive," he said. I let out a slow breath, the tension easing from my shoulders. "It was necessary," I said softly. "For too long, I let other people decide who I was. Not anymore." That evening, I walked through the venue, the empty hall echoing with the memories of every event it had held. I thought about the laughter and the music, the bright lights, and the quiet corners. I thought about all the times I had let myself be small here, and I knew as I stood there in the quiet that those days were over. Because I wasn't nobody. I never had been. And I was done pretending otherwise. The days after my stand with Marissa were filled with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The venue stood quiet, the usual bustle of deliveries and event preparations silenced by my decision. It was strange how quickly the world could change when you stopped letting others decide how it should turn. I spent those days in my own home, my movements slow and deliberate. I cooked small meals for myself, watered the potted plants that lined my kitchen window, and sat by the fire with a book I hadn't touched in years. It was a quiet sort of healing, each small act a promise to myself, you are worth this time. You are worth this care. But even in that calm, I knew the storm was only waiting for me to open the door. It came one rainy afternoon, the clouds heavy and low over the city. Michael showed up first, his knock soft, but insistent. I opened the door to find him standing there, his hair damp from the rain, his shoulders hunched as if he carried a weight he couldn't name. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" I stepped back and let him in the warm light of the living room, soft against the gray of the day outside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made so many quiet decisions. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked up at me, his eyes tired. She's angry," he said. "She thinks you're trying to ruin her." I folded my hands in my lap, my voice calm. "I'm not trying to ruin anyone," I said. "I'm trying to make them see me." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. I didn't realize he said softly, "How much you felt?" Pushed aside. I just, I thought you were okay with it." I let out a slow breath, the ache in my chest, a familiar friend. "I wanted to be," I said. "I wanted to be the kind of woman who could let it all go. But I'm not. I'm done pretending I'm okay with being treated like I don't matter." He looked up at me, something like understanding in his eyes. "I see you now," he said. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I reached across the table and laid my hand over his, a small gesture, but one that felt like a bridge. "It's not too late to see me," I said. "But you have to mean it." We sat in that quiet for a long time, the rain tapping gently against the window. When he left, he paused at the door, turning back to me. "What happens now?" he asked. I met his gaze steadily. "Now," I said softly, "I reclaim what's mine." That evening, I went back to the venue. I walked through the empty halls, the air cool, and still the faint scent of flowers lingering like a memory. I let my hand rest on the doorframe of the main hall, the polished wood smooth beneath my fingertips. This place had seen so much celebrations, laughter, quiet, heartbreak. And now, it would see me. All of me. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the silence, and then I called the manager. "I'm ready," I said simply. "Open the doors again." His voice was calm, respectful. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I'm sure," I said. "But this time, it will be on my terms." The next day, the doors of the venue opened once more, the quiet hum of life returning. But it wasn't the same as before. I was different. I walked through the main hall, my steps sure and steady, my head held high. The staff greeted me with quiet respect, their smiles genuine. They knew who I was now. They saw me. Marissa showed up that afternoon, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she approached me. Her face was calm, but her eyes were bright with something sharp and uneasy. "I see you've reopened," she said, her voice smooth. "I suppose you think this means you've won." I looked at her, my expression quiet. "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about taking back what's mine." She lifted her chin, her smile tight. "And what is that exactly?" she asked. I met her gaze evenly. "My voice," I said. "My place. My worth." For a moment, there was silence between us, the soft echo of footsteps in the background. Then she laughed, a small, bitter sound. "You're different," she said. "I don't know if I like it." I smiled faintly. "That's not my concern," I said. "I didn't do this for you." She didn't answer. She just looked at me for a long moment, and then she turned and walked away. I watched her go, the weight of that moment settling around me like a quiet triumph. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't begged. I had simply stood in my truth, and that had been enough. That night, I stood in the main hall of the venue, the soft light of the chandeliers glowing around me. I closed my eyes and let the quiet strength of the place fill me. This was my reclamation, my promise to myself that I would never again let anyone decide who I was or what I was worth. I whispered into the silence, "You're not nobody." And in that whisper, I felt the power of everything I had claimed for myself. This was only the beginning. The last day of winter dawned soft and bright, the world outside washed clean by a night of quiet rain. I woke early, the air in my room cool and still. I stood by the window for a long moment, watching the first pale rays of sun brush against the rooftops. There was a sense of something new in the air, something that felt like a promise, and I knew deep in my bones that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. At the venue, the halls were alive again, the steady hum of preparation and purpose filling the air. But it wasn't the same as before. There was a new energy here, a quiet strength that matched the one I carried in my chest. I walked through the main hall, my steps measured and sure. Every time my hand brushed against the polished wood of the doorframes, I felt that connection. This place, this history, was as much mine as it was anyone's. I paused for a moment in the center of the hall, letting the light from the tall windows wash over me. I thought about everything that had happened, the way they'd tried to make me small, the way they'd tried to erase me, and I thought about the way I had refused to let them. I had faced their anger, their dismissal, and their cold smiles, and I had stood my ground. Michael came to see me that morning, his shoulders a little less tense, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. "I wanted to see how you're doing," he said. "How you're feeling." I gave him a small, tired smile. "I'm lighter," I said honestly. "I feel like I can breathe again." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner," he said. "For not seeing you." My throat tightened, but I just nodded. "Thank you," I said softly. "That's all I ever wanted." He looked around the hall, his eyes thoughtful. "You've made this place yours," he said. "In a way none of us ever did." I let out a small breath of laughter, soft and a little sad. "It always was mine," I said. I just needed to believe it. Marissa didn't come back. Maybe she was too proud, or maybe she understood at last that I was done playing by her rules. Either way, I didn't waste any more energy on her. I had spent enough of my life trying to earn her approval, her permission to exist. I didn't need it anymore. That afternoon, I sat at my desk in the small office at the back of the venue. The lease was there, the edges of the paper worn smooth by my hands. I traced my name with the tip of my finger, feeling the weight and history of every choice I'd made. I thought about how close I had come to letting them take everything from me, my voice, my pride, my place. And I thought about the woman who had chosen to stand up and say no more. I spent the rest of the day walking through the rooms, checking the small details the way I always had. The flicker of candles, the scent of fresh flowers, the polished silverware glinting in the soft light. Each detail felt like a small act of power, a quiet promise that I would never again be overlooked. When evening fell, I locked the doors of the venue myself. I paused for a moment on the front steps, the cool night air brushing against my skin. The city stretched out before me, full of lights and laughter, but I felt no longing for what was out there. I was enough just as I was, and I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with the same quiet strength that had carried me this far. I went home and poured myself a glass of wine, the rich red liquid catching the glow of the lamp. I sat by the window, watching the stars blink awake in the night sky. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had gained, and I realized that sometimes the only way to find your place in the world is to take it back with your own two hands. As I sipped my wine, I whispered to myself, "You're not nobody." And I felt the truth of those words settle into the deepest parts of me. I was somebody. I was the woman who had been pushed to the edges and had chosen to step back into the center of her own life. And I was done apologizing for it. The next morning, the phone rang an inquiry for a new event booking. A fresh start, a new chapter. I smiled as I answered, my voice calm and sure. "This is the venue," I said. "How can I help you?" And in that moment, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. Because I wasn't just someone who had been overlooked. I was the owner, the caretaker, the voice they had tried to silence but could never truly erase. If you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this: you have the power to claim your space. You have the right to stand in your truth and say, "I matter." Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Stand up, speak your truth, because in the end, your voice is the one that matters most.